right. Well, happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome back to another Learning Tech Talks, where we are living at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience, and helping you stay future focused so you can be where the puck will be, not where it is today. And I am really looking forward to our conversation today. We're going to be talking about the measurable improvement of interpersonal skills, which I think is probably one of the most important areas to focus on, which may seem ironic given the fact we hear all this about AI and technology and all this other stuff. And to navigate this conversation with me is someone who shares my passion around this topic. It's Laura Wells, who is the founder and CEO of AwakeTeams. So thank you so much for joining me, Laura.
Good morning, Christopher. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about this.
No, we're going to have some fun. And for those who are just listening and watching, I do want to just let you know, remind you of some changes that I've made to the show. So I'm continuing to enhance this to make this better for you. So keep an eye out on things. But one of the newest additions is be sure to sign up for my Substack, because I am now taking each one of these conversations and breaking it down into a digestible version that you can then read later and say, what are the biggest takeaways and what are the things I can be doing to improve myself? So if you aren't subscribed already, definitely do that. But so Laura, let's get into this one and talk a little bit about your background. So people who may go, who is this person that Christopher's talking to about measurably improving interpersonal skills? Are they qualified? Which you are more than qualified, in my opinion, on this topic. But give us a little background into who you are and where you're coming from.
Yeah, so I spent a long time working in corporate environments in the business world. I have an international MBA, and so I started my professional journey there. Very idealistic, let's use commerce to traverse the board differences across borders and things like that. And I worked in the largest consumer packaged goods companies doing brand management on M&Ms and Colgate, and ended up on Dove at Unilever. Worked in the US and Europe, and then ended up on a global team, and eventually had to reckon with a couple of things. Making companies more profitable was not my life story. Like, I knew I worked with really smart people, and I got fantastic training. And I also, that idealism of, using commerce to traverse some of the differences and potential conflict across borders. It's not what I was doing. And I finally had to reckon with, all right, that is not really what I'm up to here. And this isn't what I want.
That wasn't getting you out of bed in the morning.
Yes. And that isn't what my whole life story is about. And also corporate culture. I recognize, like, I am not fully showing up here. My voice is not fully expressed. I am not bringing all of me. And so I left corporate and went to nonprofit.
And when was this?
This was in 2000. I was going to say the late 2000s. Yeah. Like, I started at the Brain and Behavior Research Foundation in 2010. So, and it wasn't the
you were going through some of, actually very largely, what we experience and are continuing to experience, in my opinion, on a much larger scale, with kind of the great resignation of what we've seen coming out of the pandemic, where a lot of people, I think, have gone through a similar thing where they've gone, I'm doing this. It's not really necessarily meeting what I want to do with my professional career. So you were doing it before it was cool.
Well, thank you.
You're a trendsetter.
All right, good. I hope, that's good, because we need some trends.
Okay. So you transitioned out of consumer packaged goods to nonprofit and then you continue there.
Yeah. So I landed at the Brain and Behavior Research Foundation. So I was targeting education, figuring, we have this capacity to learn and change throughout our lifetime, which we'll talk about. And I thought education. Where I ended up landing a great job on the leadership team is a place called the Brain and Behavior Research Foundation.
Okay.
And it's a philanthropic grant-giving foundation, some charity, that funds innovative neuroscientists who have out-of-the-box ideas, are having trouble getting traditional funding, need proof of concept funding, and then they often, after the grant from the foundation, would go on to get an NIH grant. And
Okay.
I went in on the leadership.
So you were working with these neuroscientists who were studying how the brain worked, seeing these really unique opportunities, but because of, maybe in some ways it relates to our topic, their interpersonal skills, we're struggling to get people to see the vision they had, where they're going, this is what the science is telling us. Here's a real opportunity. And they were struggling with that. And so the team you worked with went in and went, we think you've got something here. Let us help you bring that to life.
Yeah, so the foundation has an amazing scientific council who would select the grantees, and those are the neuroscientists. Okay. And then my most important function on the leadership team was to translate the research that was being funded so that philanthropists would give more money, basically, so people could understand. And
yeah, you were demystifying the hyper-technical scientific stuff into, here's what this really looks like in practice to do this.
Here's what this research is actually funding and making possible. And so over the course of 6 years of doing that, I learned so much about the possibility for neuroplasticity, what we can do to encourage that, how we also have to pay attention to too stressful situations that can inhibit neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is simply, I'll say simply, the brain's capacity to change and adapt throughout our lifespan. Okay. So like both structurally, like the brain as a thing, and also functionally, how well's communication and circuitry, how's communication flowing through the circuitry in the brain. Both of those continue to change throughout our lifespan. And that is a new finding, relatively speaking, right in the past 25.
So we're talking years. Both aspects of it. And I think it's an important part to, one, demystify this concept, because terms like this get thrown around a lot. Neuroplasticity can get thrown around, but we're talking about both aspects of it, which is both the structural and then our capacity to actually make those changes.
And the functional, exactly. So circuitry, yes, the structure of it.
Yeah, the brain's actually rewiring itself. It's physically rewiring its neural pathways, and then our functional capacity to do that.
Exactly. And that the more we behave in a certain way, for example, also influences the strength of the circuitry. So it's not a closed loop. It's not as if, we have this static brain and it gets impacted by things coming from the outside. It's that, yes, and we can influence that also by paying attention to the kinds of things that are coming in, choosing environments, and also the way we behave, right? By creating new habits, we reinforce circuitry. So I learned so much about that. And again, so I have to say, I'm not a neuroscientist. I was not doing the research. I had the great honor and privilege of translating the work of brilliant neuroscientists who I always vetted, right? I always vetted the translation when it's like, am I dumbing it down too much? Am I missing something critical? And so I did have the great privilege of working with.
Honestly, though, I appreciate your humble, but I think you're being maybe a little bit too humble with this, if I'm being honest with you, because that really, you are in a really unique position. And I think that can't be overstated, the fact that, you're not claiming I did all the science, I did all the research, which it'd be easy to overstate your credentials, but you do it in a very humble way of saying, listen, I'm not claiming that I did all the scientific study and the research, but being in that environment and being around it. And in many ways, I think this is why I see learning is people who are in our field sometimes are really uniquely positioned, because when you're around it and you have the tough job of saying, here is this really complicated subject matter content, but how do I distill it and break it down into a way that people who don't have that highly technical cognitive capability can then digest and go, oh, okay, that's really what that is. That you probably saw in those 6 years some incredible things that many people can probably not even imagine.
Yeah, gosh. And it really is just a question of breaking down information for people who aren't trained in that, right? It's like learning a
Right.
foreign language, which maybe that's why I didn't feel so daunted by it, because I have learned and speak some foreign languages. So in a way it was similar, like, okay, there's neuroscience. This feels like a foreign language, and I bet it can be broken down and understood. And sure
Yeah.
enough, it can. And then you have to make sure you're not breaking it down too much or in the wrong way.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I
Because you don't want to
learned
be
all.
missing core things. Okay.
Yeah, and thank you. I appreciate the acknowledgement of the experience, and I definitely garnered key insights, like what is really impactful about what's happening here, and what does that mean for the potential of human beings. And I eventually decided, that idealism in me that wanted to forge differences across borders using commerce, right? We're going to continue to need trade and business, as we call it today,
Yep.
was still alive in me. And I have a lot of skin in the game. I got an international MBA. I spent a long time in the corporate world. I decided I'm taking this back, because that
Okay.
thing, one of the reasons I left corporate, that corporate culture thing that I had made into some kind of image of, like, it's a cement block and it's a thing and I don't fit there and my voice isn't fully expressed and I'm not comfortable. I want to go somewhere else. It's like, wait, it's not a cement thing that can't change. It's just humans behaving in a particular
And it's
way.
very dynamic and fluid in nature in many ways. Okay.
Exactly, like neuroplasticity. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, okay. So you had this corporate, right, consumer packaging experience on growth and trade and business. Then you went into the nonprofit space, really understood. And again, to me, this is where the business and human side of things intersected for you on the professional spectrum of you started learning a lot more about really who people are and how they work. And then how did that lead to, wait a minute, I'm going to create AwakeTeams to make an impact?
Yeah, so I decided to become a corporate trainer, and I'm
Okay.
certified in a very well-known emotional intelligence program, and was training here in person at the largest tech companies. When I say here, I'm in the Bay Area.
Okay.
And the nonprofit I worked at was in New York City. I moved out to the Bay Area, was interested in okay, what is the best way to bring this into corporations. So
Okay.
I was training in person, facilitating, and learned, like, gosh, sometimes there were wait lists for the program. The employees really want this kind of upskilling. They know they need emotional intelligence, interpersonal
Yep.
skills, social and emotional skills, that in order to manage people, in order to advance in their career, and are willing to pay for it. It's a huge
Yeah.
market. It's often called soft
There's a
skills training. Companies see the research that says, okay, this is supposed to increase employee engagement, reduce turnover, hit the bottom line, and increase productivity. So we're going to invest in it.
companies
And
throw
I would hear this.
millions, billions of dollars at this.
So everybody's acknowledging this is important, right? The
Yep.
people want the upskilling, the companies are paying for it. And I would kept hearing this frustration on the part of the buyers of the program, who would say, we don't have any data. Like we read the research, our people want it, but we have absolutely no idea what we just did with our money. We're in the dark as to what that training actually did. Did something
if it
happen?
accomplished what we believed that it would. The desire
Right.
was there. The desire was there. There's a general recognition. And I think this is a consistent theme I see. I mean, I've been doing this my whole career. It's a consistent theme where there's this general acknowledgement. We know this is an important thing. We're willing to invest in it. Yet we keep running into, did it achieve anything? Did people get better? And did them getting better have an impact on our organization?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So this idea that soft skills are soft and fuzzy and can't be measured, right, has gotten kind of accepted. Like, oh, well, shot in the dark. We know we have to invest in it, so we will. But leaders are frustrated. They're like, we
It
need to
drives me
justify.
absolutely bonkers on that point. You are 100% right that is a false statement that has been accepted by the vast majority is, well, soft skills, you can't really measure it. And it drives me absolutely bananas because yes, you can. You
Yeah.
can measure improvement in soft skills, in
Yeah,
behaviors.
and
We
so
can see
these
how
are
behaviors change.
yeah, so that led me to AwakeTeams. So prior to
Okay.
COVID, in-person facilitating at great companies, feeling the passion and the need for it, the willingness to pay for it, and this real concern like, yeah, but what do we do with our money? Were skills acquired? Did they stick? Is there really a bottom line impact? And it was really fair. Those questions were fair.
If you're
And
spending billions of dollars on it, you should be asking the question, did we get anything for that?
And by the way, we also learn better as humans when we get data, right? Like we get
Yes.
grades in school. Have I got this? Can I move on to the next subject, or do I need to double down here? How am I doing? And so without data, we're also limiting the learning process for us.
Yeah.
So I decide during COVID, all right, I'm going to figure this out because we really need these interpersonal skills. This thing called corporate culture, like, is just humans showing up and behaving in a particular way. And it does not need to be destructive to people, to the planet, right? And the impact of business activities. It just doesn't have to be. It's us showing up in a particular
There's a better
way.
way. There's a better way.
And making decisions and using our cognitive capacities in particular ways. So I decide during COVID, I'm going to figure this out. We need it. And there's this gap that they are measurable. These are behaviors, right? These are demonstrable behaviors. How well am I communicating? Am I synthesizing and summarizing clearly? Is it landing with you? Are you understanding what I'm saying? Am I able to listen and take in your response? These are observable things. Building trust.
But you have to your point on this though, you have to deconstruct that. And I think a lot of times that's been an area that we just haven't leaned into it as much as we could.
Yeah. So that is what I've done, what we've done at AwakeTeams.
You set out to solve for that.
Yes. And so early on, I did a tech accelerator program. It's so funny. I was in the corporate world, left the corporate world. I'm going to nonprofit to do good. And then I'm back in like Silicon Valley.
You come full circle.
Tech accelerator program. I know.
The thing is though, but the thing is, and this is why I'm really looking forward to this discussion, is it's always interesting to me as people go through their life cycle journey. And is this even, well, it may sound like a sidebar, it actually represents what you learned about neuroplasticity through your work in the nonprofit, which is we are on these growth journeys throughout our adult lives. I mean, really all the way through. And the choices we make, whether we want to get complacent, which ultimately leads to atrophy, or continue to push ourselves to grow and develop, really you have a lot more control over that than you realize. At the same time, there is a lot of opportunity in this area to help people do a better job, because largely people don't know where they need to develop, going back to the fact that they kind of know I need to get better at interpersonal, but I don't necessarily know the specific behaviors that I need to focus on. I don't know what benefit I'm going to gain from growing those. And I don't know whether I'm making measurable progress, which are all indicators that help people want to grow. And I think it's a noble thing. And there's definitely an area for this for sure.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's delightful to talk to somebody who just gets it right away and feels it. And so the tech accelerator kicked me off. It was the very early tech accelerator program. So you just had to have sort of an idea on a piece of paper, which was what I had. And then they like twist and turn. And, by the end of it, 3 months later, I had an idea that had been vetted. And that particular accelerator program, 80 of us started, only 20 of us finished. So they really do twist and pull, and they insist this is the kind of business that you have to prove that you can create. And so if we fast forward from there to now, I definitely, just like the reason I make teams, we learn together. We also, produce together. So we now have a product in market, customers, revenue, and data. And so what is AwakeTeams and how does it work? So AwakeTeams develops interpersonal skills within workplace teams and measures impact. And so it's in 3-month modules. So a series of 3-month modules, teams of 4 to 10 people who actually work together, go on this learning journey together. And that's because we don't see our own blind spots, especially in
No.
these interpersonal skills. I may think I'm awesome, right? Oh my gosh, I build trust so well.
Well, and if you really want to look at work, because one of the things I recently did one of these live streams, a solo stream on my reflections over the last 4 years, because I started this live stream right before the pandemic hit. And so it's been an absolute treasure trove watching the incubator of society and workforce trends over the last 4 years as we went through the pandemic, then we came out of it and all these things. And your point about our assumptions about how good we are at things are often not accurate. And we saw that with the pandemic when we had a lot of teams that suddenly their team structure got disrupted and a lot of assumptions were made. Oh, we're really great communicators. Everyone understands what we're doing as a team. We have strong relationships with each other. We know how to connect.
Yeah.
And suddenly when the environmental factor changed, a lot of people had a mirror held up to them that went, oh, like I don't like what I'm seeing right now. Like there's
those mirrors.
We needed that.
It's like that neuroplasticity loop, right? We are impacted by what's outside of us, and then we choose new behavior and we reinforce learning. So we actually need the mirror. Otherwise, we stay
even though it's not fun. It's never fun when that mirror is first held up to you and you go, that's what I look like. But you can either choose to go, you can either, and I think this goes back to that neuroplasticity. You can either choose to go, I'm just going to get rid of the mirror because I don't like looking at that. Or you can go, what am I going to do to change what I see so that I can like what I see in the mirror?
Yeah, and so that I am learning, right? So that I am malleable and I'm permeable to feedback and I am adapting and changing, which we're capable of throughout our lifespan, right? Which I only said very briefly, but that they used to think, right? At maturity, the brain was static and didn't change anymore. And it does throughout our lifespan. So, and also things like
on this one, I actually follow-up question on you, because you talked about the fact that this is relatively new on this. What is relatively new? Because that is a fundamental scientific seismic shift that does actually change the conversation. Because if historically there was a belief that people are static and where they are is static and there's only so much you can maybe change some environmental factors, you can maybe change some of these other things, but for the most part, a person is static, to suddenly going, oh, wait, that's not true at all. And honestly, even people knowing that about themselves can change things, because once you recognize like, wait, I don't have to, what I see in the mirror doesn't have to be what's in the mirror forever. And I actually can change that. How relatively new is that?
So in the past 30 years. So there are researchers who say if they went to medical school, that's what they were taught, that the brain is static at maturity. And so one of the neuroscientists who funded by the foundation, the Brain and Behavior Research Foundation, who I had the privilege of interviewing, and we did a piece on him in there was this quarterly magazine that we did. Bruce McEwen, he's at Rockefeller University in New York. In the 1960s, he discovered there are stress receptors in the brain. And from that, particularly in the hippocampus region, and that those stress receptors enable change to happen and facilitate neurogenesis, or the creation of new cells and synapses, or the deterioration, what you called atrophy earlier. And so that kicked off, and a number of other researchers. I was actually just looking at it. I pulled out that magazine actually before our call to remind myself, and there are so many people to be named. He just was,
no, but what you're sharing with that, when you think about, because someone could hear that and think 30 years, that doesn't sound that new. But if for a long, long period of time leading up to that, the whole thought has been, no, we're static, 30 years is actually a blip on the screen when we think about what it takes to change overall. So to get society to start to accept and recognize that is a fundamental non-truth that we have discovered. 30 years is, think about how long it takes society to even know, wait a minute, what? That's a false thing that I used to believe that now I need. You're talking decades before even, I have to imagine that research initially probably was not met with everybody going, oh, now this all makes sense. Like we've broadly accepted that.
Yeah. So, well, and I also think we maybe weren't tuned in and paying that much attention to neuroscience. Now we are.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it's what becomes possible with that learning, that we can't accept status quo. We can't say, well, that's the
No,
best
we
we can
can't.
do. That's just the way it is, because it's not true. Like, we are always
Right.
capable of learning. And so I'll just take it back to Awake Teams. And so
Yeah.
Awake Teams, what's different about Awake Teams is that in our learning model, we target specific skills. So yes, it's soft skills, and we name them. It's not, oh, we're raising your EQ, or, oh, you'll have higher emotional intelligence. It's each 3-month module develops 5 specific skills. So we
Okay.
name specific skills. It's not, you don't have to guess, right? And then we use measurement. And so in our case,
Okay.
we use anonymous peer assessment. So I get to say, like, trust, our foundational our foundational curriculum is trust building, communication, and collaboration skills. And that's because there's so much research that indicates those are the skills that increase employee engagement. They get us to
You want to talk
enable.
about a foundational pillar that you can focus on that will strengthen the foundation of a building. Like, you just named it right there.
Yeah.
If that skill is lacking, you are built on the sand.
Yeah. So in trust, for example, there are 5 specific skills, and they're observable behaviors. It's not like, oh, I trust Christopher more this month than I did last month. No, it's like,
Yeah.
how often do I see Christopher seeking to understand different perspectives? How often do you see me sharing both my strengths and my challenges with the team?
Yep.
Those kinds of things. So we each rate ourselves, and then anonymously each month after the synchronous team session, we each rate each other. And it's for the learning, right? It's not a performance. It's not performance management. It's not
Right.
It's not an
It's
annual
not to
review.
punish you or say this is where you're really bad, you're a bad person, or these are the things. It's to help you see here's where you sit. It's like stepping on the scale.
It's the
You don't know whether you need to
mirror.
lose weight or gain until you step on the scale and go, okay, that's the number. That's what I'm
Yeah.
working with.
Exactly. And with interpersonal skills, there is no other way to measure them than interpersonally. This is about, building trust. I may think I'm awesome, but it makes no sense, right? Because it's like building trust with what? With whom? And
Right.
communication is about, how does it land? Are we dialoguing? Collaboration, right? So the only way to measure them is interpersonally. And that
Through
means
interpersonal
the
interactions.
people we work with, right? And that's important. So the team for us, 4 to 10, it's important. These have to be people that you actually work with, who you acknowledge to some extent your success depends on how you're showing up with these people.
Okay.
And so you have to care what they think. You can't dismiss it. You can't be like, oh, well, I don't care what they think, or they don't really know. No, there's like an upfront acknowledgement. We are a team, and we have
So
to.
there's some well, and this actually gets to, and maybe we'll come back and kind of talk about what these, because what I'm doing is I'm listening to you talk about all this. I'm formulating where are the opportunity areas in what I see historically, and they're actually lining up very nicely to when I've looked into these spaces and when I've worked in these spaces, where are the gaps normally in what you see, which is what we talked about in the beginning of companies are throwing billions of dollars at this for what? And we'll come back to these. So again, some of it is the intentional selection of who are people that it actually matters that I have good interpersonal relationships with.
Exactly. And then the mirror.
Because at the end of the day, you could be great, but if the people that it actually matters to have it with, if they don't think you're great, it actually really doesn't matter all that much.
That's exactly right. You stand in your corner, you're like, no, I'm great. Well, then you're standing in your corner.
I have these friends that tell me I'm really great. Well, your friends aren't the ones telling you how your workplace performance is. So it doesn't really matter that your friends are great. Your coworkers don't think so.
Yeah. And so by doing that, it's also, right, an attempt to normalize the getting feedback, right? That it's a critical part of learning, that we need the feedback. And so then there's There's a progress
Okay.
report every month that summarizes the data that each of us see. And, whoever paid for the program, they get to see it too. And then at the end of the 3 months, it's a quarter. 3 months is long enough for behavior change. And it's also long enough for our data to be significant. Then whoever paid for the program also can see, oh, these specific skills, what happened? How much did they improve?
Yep.
And what's the impact on engagement and performance? And so with specific numbers. And the monthly progress reports that we all get, that's where we get that mirror. And then, and we continue to get the learning and the training, right? It's not like, oh, this is a diagnostic assessment. This is who you are. This is who Christopher is. And now let's create strategies on how to work with Christopher. It's like, yeah, no, neuroplasticity. This is how Christopher's experienced today.
Yeah.
And now let's give him some tools and then measure again in a month and see how we experience Christopher then.
What's interesting it's interesting as I'm reflecting on what you've shared and the fact you started with, in the training space, one of these, and we don't have to talk about which one, but the assessment tools. Even some of those, one of the opportunities I often see with them is they put people in a static category.
Exactly.
You are a blank. And suddenly people start going, that's what I am. Exactly. That's how I am. That's how I behave. This is the static, concrete version of who I am, which is so far from the truth, because maybe you are today because of the environmental factors you're in, or maybe you look at that and go, I wish I was better in that area. But they have this tendency to reinforce, well, you know what? You just are that. I mean, I am naturally introverted. Guess what? I've had to learn how to build extroversion skills because it's been extremely important to my career, and I've built it, and it still exhausts me, but you can build these things. And I think it's fantastic how you're really drilling into that.
Yeah, it's that neuroplasticity thing again, right? That we're living microcosms of that. That if we think, oh, I am that, and therefore I just continue to do that, then I'm reinforcing the circuitry, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling. Yeah, then I am that.
It's a self-fulfilling process.
Keep doing that. Yeah. Whereas I can choose to do something new. And for us to step out of our comfort zone is challenging, right? So
even what you said about feedback. Even what you said about feedback, it can be really hard the first time you look in the mirror and go, or the first time you, I mean, again, I'm using a lot of analogies, but the first time you step on the scale can be like, I'm not, but then you start doing it and you start seeing the progress and you start going, okay, I'm getting this feedback. So then when you have that time where you go to Thanksgiving or you whatever, and you come back and go, shoot, I kind of like went off track, but you're like, okay, but I can look at that now, and it's a little easier for me to go, okay, but I can keep stepping forward with
it's a little easier for me to look, and I have people who I'm in this with. In our case, it's really hard for us to change behavior by ourselves. Just as hard as it is for us to get out of our comfort zone, right? The mirror thing.
Yeah.
And then to stay, right? Because it is like, if it's creating new circuitry, then it is uncomfortable.
It's hard work.
It's hard work.
It's why a lot of companies talk about the need to reskill and upskill. And a lot of where I spend my time is helping people understand that is not a small task. That is not something that you just go, hey, everybody, I know you all behave like this. We need you to behave like this now, and we're done. And everything you've just described just highlights this is hard work. And it's not just work. You're actually rewiring your brain. So you are physiologically changing a human being, which is a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, and it's also not an individual. Just like the brain isn't a closed loop, we also are not closed loops. So if we think we can do it by ourselves, we're fooling ourselves, because we're impacted by the environments we're in, by the people we're around, by the feedback we're getting, by the support we have, even like creating shared intentions together in a group significantly increases the likelihood that we will actually do that, right? That it actually becomes a new norm, a new way of behaving, because we're holding each other accountable. All right. And we can learn positive, constructive ways to do that. And that's important, right? Because this is hard territory, and the mirror is uncomfortable, and getting out of our comfort zones is uncomfortable, and it's essential. Otherwise, like, who's going to look at the human race today and say, oh no, let's just stop growing. Status quo is working. It's good enough. Right? Like,
well, yeah,
and we
this
don't have
doesn't need to be that conversation, but I can tell you right now, if you're looking around the world just going, I actually think we're good. I don't really think there's anywhere for us to grow.
Right. Yeah, as a species, as a species,
So
we have evolving to do. So and it's possible.
We have some growth. So, question for you on this that I do want to touch on that you just shared with this, because I am very empathetic to people. And what we talked about, I know we've talked about this and made jest and light about it, but I actually am very sensitive to the fact that looking in the mirror can be very hard for people.
It is.
And it can almost be borderline traumatic
It is.
when based on, you really never know anyone's story. And the number of people I've talked to who the reason they haven't looked in the mirror isn't because of some just, I think I'm amazing. It's because of baggage and trauma or things they've experienced where it is actually physically painful to look in the mirror because of it brings up all these other things, which I think you hinted at this earlier with the neuroplasticity side of things, that like, hey, there are a lot of factors and you can push it too hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can push people too hard and break them. How do you help people find that right line where it's like, we want to push you into the zone? Again, we can use the zone of proximal development, where we're pushing you to stretch hard enough that we're making some micro tears. Again, I use a lot of physical growth and development things. Right? I just think about lifting weights. You want to make some micro tears in your muscle. You want to make some micro tears because that actually makes the muscle heal better. But if you push too hard, you will tear the muscle and the ligament to a point where you're causing damage.
Yeah.
And that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
How do you help people find that sweet spot in there? Because getting that sweet spot is important. And everybody's sweet spot looks a little bit different. And what might be great micro tears for one person might rip the ligament right off the bone.
Yeah. So in our case, so the feedback is anonymous. And then it's in a 3-month learning journey, right? So the whole, it's all set up. The framework is, we are here to learn and develop, and we're doing it together as a team, right? We will get better as individuals. We're getting the upskilling we need, and we're going to function better as a team. So we're in this together. And when you get the feedback, then you get a personalized sequence of a bite-sized learning every week. So it's not, again, it's not the assessment. Here's who you are. Now we're going to figure out what to do with you. It's like, in today, in this context, in this group of people, here's where you are today. And this is the group and the context we're focused on right now. Here's some, use this, like, here's your nudge learning this week. And then the next week, here's your nudge learning this week. And it's very application-based, behavioral-based. Do this, demonstrate these behaviors. Here's how you do it. This week, focus on this to develop this growth edge, right? And then you continue
to break it down into digestible pieces. And again, this goes back to some of the things that we'll maybe recap at the end that I think you're doing that, just based on my experience, have really impactful differences. Is you're spacing this out, you're breaking it into digestible chunks. So instead of saying you looked in the mirror, you stepped on the scale, you need to drop 100 pounds and build 50 pounds of muscle next week. It's like, well, that's just not even fit. You're saying, no, we get it. This is 3 months. We've broken this into a reasonable, manageable approach, and we've broken it into pieces. We've anonymized it to help make looking in the mirror not feel like, hey, we're all looking in the mirror at you right now. Like, nope, you get a chance to look in the mirror in the security of yourself.
Yeah, and everybody gets it, right? We're all in it together, and we're all going through the same experience, and we're all also learning the same behaviors. We have access to the same research. It's all very research backed. Brilliant PhDs who contribute to this, so that it's objective, right? Again, it's not, oh, I trust you more, I trust you less. No, it's an objective research backed curriculum. And the minimum is 3 months, right? That's where we begin, because that really
That's a
is
starting point.
like, let's see, okay, are we getting used to this? Like, yeah, it is a little painful to get feedback, because generally speaking, it's not something we're acculturated to, that
No.
this is good,
It's
and
a
this
good
is for
thing.
learning, and I get to do new behaviors that, right, that isn't our natural, I think, a cultured,
No.
right?
Well,
It's
no,
like,
and
no, I'm
I
supposed to
did
have
a
it
thing.
all.
Well, and I did a live stream a couple months ago talking about how in a lot of organizations, the word coaching is synonymous with performance management, and the impact that that has on a lot of employees when they hear and they see these things. It creates a visceral reaction, because there's an assumption of, oh, you think something's wrong with me, you're trying to fix me, or you're trying to, it's punitive in nature, instead of, and I
Rather
think this goes back to
than,
the people listening and watching who are thinking, there's a lot of things you have to do with your business leaders, with your organization, to help make sure you're setting the right context for this, because that is in many regards how people can approach and feel when they start hearing, like, wait, that's why I even hate when organizations start talking about, we need to reskill everybody. It can create this environment of like, you all aren't good enough and we got to fix you to make you valuable, instead of saying, no, you are all uniquely
you
valuable.
are
We need to grow
adaptable.
together. We need to
Yeah,
grow together to reach our new potential. We need to grow together to achieve what the future, because the future has changed. This isn't because you're inept, it's because things have changed and we need to
exactly.
grow and adapt to the new environment that's in front of us.
It's because you have untapped potential. It's because there
Yes.
are new things that are called for now that we need to step into, and that's going to be
Yeah.
uncomfortable, and it's an opportunity to learn and adapt that we are completely capable of,
Yeah.
right?
So something else I want to drill into on this, that I love that you hit on this, because going back to our earlier point of, well, so one, we busted a bunch of myths. One, the myth that we're static. No, we're not. The research, the neuroscience shows, no, we're not. Your brain physically changes and you are capable of change. So if you're thinking people are stuck and they're static, just throw that one out the window. But then
No
the other
excuse.
one is,
Right, no
right.
excuse.
The other one is
Stand
that
up.
behavior and skills can't be measured, which again, not true. I want to spend a little time drilling into this, because you brought up these skills. And I think it's really important that people think and hear the deconstruction of this in a good way, because I see so much opportunity to reconstruct this better, which is, we often talk about soft skills in this esoteric, ethereal language, like communication, get better at communicate. Well, good grief, that is way too broad for people to really be able to understand actionably. So what should I do to get better, and where should I specifically grow and develop? Just like you don't just tell someone, get in shape. That's not an
What
effective
does
way
that
to coach
mean?
someone.
And
You know,
how
just go
will I
get in
know if
shape.
it's happening?
Well, no, like
Right.
what
Yeah.
way? Like, what should I
Where to
do? Where are
target?
the areas that I can grow and develop? Do I want to improve my cardio health? Do I want to improve my body mass? Like, what am I really trying to do? So as you look at this, how has your teams and how have really the neuroscience community helped broken some of these things down into more tangible and actionable things? Because that to me is the key to being able to measure.
Yeah.
Because if you just
Yeah.
keep it general communication, it's like, well, you can't measure that, but you've
Right.
broken it down.
So we pull a lot also from industrial and organizational psychology. So
Okay.
it's specifically designed for the workplace too. And so we have this
Okay.
frame around employee engagement, showing up cognitively, physically, emotionally at work, right? And that is always low. I mean, according to Gallup, it's like 23% is a high. 23% of employees around the
Yes.
world are engaged, like showing up, what they would what self-qualified, showing up cognitively, physically, and emotionally. 23% of, like, it just blows my mind. What's possible for us
And going
humans
back to things we've
if
just
we show up
accepted
and we
as the
go to work?
norm, that's another one of those
Exactly.
ones where companies are like, yeah, 25%
Exactly.
of the workforce is gay. I guess it's like,
Yeah.
what? That's 3/4 that's a huge room for improvement. Okay.
Yeah. And why are we settling for that? Why are we allowing ourselves to stay and be in environments and like concrete, right? And think
Yep.
we can't be more. We can't bring more of ourselves because the world
Yeah.
needs us to do that, actually, right? Nobody can argue with that.
Yeah.
The world
No.
needs us humans to be participating and cognitively, physically, and emotionally, right? And connecting. And um, so we pull from industrial and organizational psychology and social psychology. And employee engagement, that term was coined by William Kahn in the late 80s. And since then, there's been so much research around employee engagement. It's the most measured metric in human resources. And
Yep.
so
It is.
yeah. And there's so much research now that demonstrates what else it links to, including productivity, including reduced turnover.
Well, that's what I was going to say, that sometimes is
belonging.
lacking in that, is that engagement isn't always connected back to the workplace business metrics of, this isn't just like a squishy thing like, oh yeah, 25% of our workforce is engaged. Like, no, this actually ties to dollars and cents.
Exactly. Hits the bottom line, productivity, and also in turnover. And also in mental health, like the lack of belonging and the impact of not showing up fully.
Yeah.
And so in breaking down, so the first breaking down was, okay, then what are the behaviors and skills in the workplace that
Okay.
increase employee engagement? And there's enough research now. And so
Okay.
what came to the top was trust. So building trust, feeling safe with each other, having conditions of psychological safety, and then communication skills, right? How well are things being expressed and understood, heard, valued, giving and receiving feedback, how's that done? And collaboration, things like managing conflict. So our curriculum became based on that. So trust building, communication, collaboration. And so that's the foundational. So like year one is 3-month modules in each of those. And then the vision is that there are infinite variations off of that, because you can take a couple of those or one of those foundational trust building skills and do a full 3 months. So for example, like seeking to understand different perspectives is a really key trust building skill. And so part of what's done with that, part of the bite-sized learning and in the team sessions, is working with unconscious bias. That could easily be, right? Level 2, level 3 trust.
You could blow that out. Right. Okay. So, and that helps me understand too how you're thinking about this, because going back to it at the high level, you've done the diagnosis of, yes, obviously there's a bajillion behaviors and skills we could focus on, but what are the ones that are actually ultimately driving business performance, which I think they have impact on far more than just business performance in terms of people's well-being. But so you're looking at that, and again, laying the foundation of, hey, getting these things measurably improved as a foundation is fantastic. Then continuing to layer on and build onto that, and then saying, now where can we specialize and go deeper in some of these? Because the ones you mentioned, you really could go into a microcosm just on each one of these things.
It's going to be infinite variations on these 3-month modules. And 3 months is the minimum for behavior change, and enough time for people to get used to the mirroring, get used to taking data in, right? 3 months is really a minimum.
And that's the sweet spot you found in terms of actually one. Well, so let me ask you this. Do you find with that people, are there efficiencies of scale as you start to like build this muscle, or do you find even still, like maybe you've gotten more comfortable with feedback, you're a little better at looking in the mirror and seeing things, do you still find the actual behavior change still takes about 3 months no matter what?
It's a minimum is what I would, it's a minimum. And it's also palatable for organizations. Like 3 months was enough, like, because I don't offer like a free, like, okay, try this for a day or try this for a week, because our whole differentiator is data and real change, right? Measurable improvement. So you can't do it in a day or a week. And so 3 months became the minimum, right? Like I can't make companies commit to the year,
No, but I think that's a really good thing for people. Well, no, but I think it's a really good thing. And I don't ask that to see, is there a way to shortcut this? Because I really think this is important for people to think and really reflect on what you're bringing up. And I even anecdotally, I'm not a scientist by any means, but even anecdotally, I have seen that throughout my career, that really nothing effective happens in less than 3 months. It
Yeah.
really doesn't. And that's one of the biggest pain points I continue to see when there's pressure or people are trying to design, like, how do we get people to do this in a week or 2 weeks? And it's like, well, I mean, do you really want to drive change, or are you just looking to say you did a thing?
Exactly.
Because if you're really trying to drive change, you have to think in 3 months. And to your point, I love the fact you said that's minimum.
That is a
Like,
minimum.
that's
And
not like you're going to
bite-sized
be a different
learning.
person in 3 months. That's to see measurable change, maybe changing your trajectory. You haven't arrived in 3 months.
No, and the bite-sized learning is also best for the way that we integrate memory as humans. So like we can't take it all, integrate and adapt our behaviors all at once,
No.
like over time, right? Drips over time. And also we get used to this feedback model. Again, because I think it's sort of, it's a little countercultural, right? That
It is very.
yeah,
We want everything right now in the smallest bite, and we want to be done with it and hit the
and
easy
I want to
button.
be comfortable, and I don't want to believe I have blind spots, or if I do, I want to do it in the privacy, right? But it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way, because the only way, especially with interpersonal skills, to get those blind spots revealed is through others. And then to get beyond them is to practice new behaviors, right? And develop new habits, get some new circuitry, right? Some new things, and it starts to feel comfortable. After we do things for a while, it starts to feel comfortable, less challenging, right? And then we move on and we can do something else, right? We find the next challenge.
Well, and that's just it, is going back to some of the other things to consider for folks, is the fact that, like you said, we only have so much capacity to do this change, because there's a lot of hard work going into it. I mean, again, going back to the physiological, you're literally rewiring your brain. So to try and get somebody to change 15 things, you're just not going to be able to do it. Their brain literally can't even handle that kind of thing. But then being able to do that over time, and being able to do it and put it into a state of steady state, where now it's no longer building that new tissue. It's saying we've moved it to a state of consistency. But how do you help people with that? Because that can be dangerous territory, where you can go into complacency, where you go, oh, now I've got it, I'm going to kick it in the back seat, which to some degree you can deprioritize it, but you can't just go, well, I'm never going to touch that again, because that's where atrophy starts kicking in.
Right. So that's also why I really encourage continuing on with in our case, right, in other 3-month modules, because we pull the threads forward. Right. So their trust isn't really completely independent from communication, which isn't really independent from collaboration. So we pull the threads forward, and you're doing it with the people you work with. And so there's this, right, implicit acknowledgement over the course of the program that, okay, we get to hold each other accountable. We're supposed to. That's a part of this. Oh, it's not like I'm doing something wrong if I raise my hand and say, hey, we're not doing that practice here. Like, we're really not hearing each other. We're not playing back. We're not confirming. That we have objective ways to do that. And it becomes part of our culture that, oh, right, we have these shared intentions together as a group, because we want to develop as individuals, and it impacts the way we perform as a team. So let's hold each other accouable in constructive ways. It's not like I'm going to take you down next time I see you doing that.
I'm not going to call you out in a group meeting and be like, hey, here's totally, but how do we do that productively? Which, again, even the experience you've described in and of itself will build some of the things that you're talking about. That's the funny part about everything you described, is the experience itself is designed to reinforce the behaviors and the skills that you're building in that experience.
Exactly. It's all, you're exactly right. It's all part of the same package. We learn so much better, and we learn more together.
Well, and it goes back to modeling what you want to see.
And noticing, right? Like, oh, who's doing that? Who's doing that better? Oh, and where am I better? It's both and it's all good. It's not a competition. We're in this to show up more physically, cognitively, and emotionally, right? Because then we feel better when we're doing that, when we feel like I am here, I am expressing myself, my voice is heard and valued, right? We feel better and we perform better. And doing it with people we work with creates connection, and then we don't want to leave. It's harder to quit, right? Because I'm connected here and we've built something together. We've been in this process together.
Yeah, it's huge. So I knew we were going to run. So coming into the home stretch on this, one of the things that I think would be helpful for folks is the way we've talked about it, I think can be good. It can also be challenging for folks because we've talked about it like this is so intuitive and so natural, which I love when I talk to people where it is really intuitive and natural. And it's like, yeah, duh. Like, well, of course, this is what we do. That's not always the case. And I know people who watch and listen to my show, that is not always the experience they have. They're dealing with leaders who go, yeah, I don't see it that way. And we even talked backstage. There are people you encounter where they just go, no, I don't really think this is all that important. I don't think soft skills matter. I don't think. What things, as you've gone through this journey, is there any feedback or thoughts that you would share with people who may be hearing this going, I agree? Hopefully, if you don't agree, we've convinced you. Number one, hopefully we've convinced you this matters and there are ways you can get around it. But for those who go, I agree, but I'm struggling. I keep running into headwinds, or I'm dealing with people who don't see what we just described. What have you found? And I don't know that there's any easy answer to this, but have you found things that help bring people along for the ride that you would share with folks?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I have found like that I need to find the people who it resonates with, right? It's like another hill to climb if I have to convince them in the first place that, oh, interpersonal skills are important. They matter in the workplace. And look, they hit your bottom line and productivity and turnover. So I don't spend a lot of time. If there's not a resonance and I get it, it's just one more hill I don't want to climb. So I have found there are enough people who get it and who know. Okay. And as I said, it's an enormous market. There's so much investment happening in soft skills that there are enough people for me to find, right? Where it's resonant. And I do like the other day, I was talking to somebody who was like, yeah, no, interpersonal skills, that's passe. It's all about AI now, artificial intelligence. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And we use some AI, right? It's an algorithm that personalizes the learning sequence and generates progress report and uses the data, right? So I am not opposed to AI, and I'm super excited about how else we're going to use AI to enhance the learning of these interpersonal skills so that we humans stay in charge, learn to behave better together, right? And it's hard. I get all the excitement about AI, and they're not separate. They're not, we can't make them separate.
We can't bifurcate them. We can't. And that could be an entire conversation in and of itself for folks who are curious about that. I'm releasing a special episode on Thursday that drills just into this component and how, if anything, AI is increasing the need for interpersonal skills, and not only just for our interpersonal relationships, but actually the way we interact with the machines. So could not agree more with you. The part that I want to call out that you said in that first piece, though, that I think is actually really sage wisdom, is sometimes it's easy to want to keep trying to hammer that person who just isn't there and try and like, well, I'm going to get them on board. And you just keep going and going and going instead of going, you know what, maybe this person isn't there yet. So I'm going to shift my energy and I'm going to go and transfer it and go find someone who is, because I think as an encouragement to what you said, there are enough people out there who are getting it. And so if you're an internal stakeholder and you go, well, this leader just doesn't get it. Okay, maybe it's a season to go, I'm not going to keep fighting with that leader. I'm going to go find a different leader who does get it. And guess what? Once this starts working, that leader who was a skeptic and didn't believe me, and this other leader, and I can say this from countless times in my career, once they start looking like a fool or in front of their peers because they were the one that was the naysayer, and their peer who went, I get it, I'm in, starts outperforming them, they sometimes come along for the ride.
Yeah, and like energy begets energy, right? I mean, conflict is important and differing perspectives. It's foundational and all in our trust module, and energy, like go, like also lean into where the energy is happening and find those places and get a foothold, right? And so now we have data now, and so I don't spend a lot of time trying to convince people who don't get it, at least not for my business. It's interesting. Sometimes it's an interesting.
I think it's, like I said, I think it's wise. The thing is, I think that's wise, sage wisdom, not even just for you and your business. I think for practitioners who may be frustrated, pulling their hair out, banging their head, sometimes you do just need to set it on the shelf and say, I'm going to go do this somewhere else. And that's okay. And actually, that may be the best step. That may be the best step to actually bring that person along for the ride. Okay.
Yeah. And it's hard, like, as I said, we humans, how can we really look at our behavior and say, oh, we're good. We don't need to be better personally. We're good. We got it. We're done. We've as evolved as we're going to be.
Yeah. It's pretty easy to dismantle the arguments. I will just say that. But sometimes you got to know when you're like, you know what? It's not the right time. Yeah. Well, Laura, we could continue this conversation for a very long time, but we are at the top of the hour. So I just want to close this up and say thank you so much for coming on, for sharing what you've learned. Hopefully we've busted some myths. Hopefully this has changed the thinking for some folks. And again, really encourage people that there are better solutions out there. So thank you for the work you're doing and for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Christopher. This was a pleasure. Really delightful.
All right. Well,
thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. And really enjoyed it. Thank you all for tuning in. Continue. I look forward to next week. And like I said, keep an eye out for later this week. I'll be talking about this specifically as it relates to artificial intelligence, but check out Laura and her work. I think they're doing some really awesome stuff. Have a great week, and we will see you next week.